welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your 7.75 out of 10 host, Madelyn.
I'm your 3.3 stars out of 5 host, Emma.
That's still less.
I know.
And thanks for tuning in this week. We're not just giving ourselves ratings on number scales and star scales, but this week for our side quest, we're here to rate the whole process of writing game reviews.
Yes. At the end, we'll give it a objective numerical score. The idea of the game review in general.
Game review. Must buy. But yeah, I decided it was my week to pick our side quest topic.
You decided?
What do you mean I decided?
You said, I decided it was my turn.
No, I'm sorry. I started a sentence and then I picked up. I decided, hyphen. It was my turn to pick this week's side quest topic, and I decided, after spending a little bit of time on Twitter in the past couple of weeks, that we should talk about game reviews.
I love Twitter.
It was so unpleasant.
It remains unpleasant.
I know, but at least my feed has, calmed down about, that one particular tweet a little bit, at least. It's not my whole feed anymore. So I mostly this week, my kind of big picture question for the week is what makes a good game review? And there are a lot of definitions of good there, and I'm sure we'll talk about many different ways to think about it. But yeah, what makes a 10 out of 10 game review, and what makes an 8 out of 10 game review, and what makes it's a 6, or it's a 2, or it's a 3, who cares, I'm not gonna buy it, game review.
Yeah.
So I would be remiss if I didn't immediately point everyone to the WikiHow called How to Write a Game Review. You could pretty much stop listening to the podcast now.
Yeah, just Google that, look it up. That's it. That's how you do it.
For a confusing reason, it's all about Mortal Kombat 10.
The game to write game reviews about.
The pinnacle of game to write game reviews about.
The most reviewiest game out there, I would say.
Look, they say it might just be the best fighting game to come out in 2016.
Because there's so many fighting games that come out every year.
I have no idea. But it's there. It was written by the WikiHow staff. Emma raised the very important question beforehand of were they paid to write a positive review of Mortal Kombat 10 for this
Can't
WikiHow?
trust those shills on WikiHow.
You just don't know. They won't even list their names. So it's really
no
unclear.
Transparency.
Yeah. There's no one even to go after, even if there were allegations of corruption against WikiHow here. So there you have it, folks. My if this podcast does nothing for you, you can go there and you'll get a nice little how-to guide. So, I have a lot of little side questions this week, as I feel like I always do.
That's fine.
And as usual, it's a struggle to know where to start. Well, let's dive in. I guess we've been talking a bit about rating systems in general here, in jokingness here at the top. So let's start there. If we're building, Emma, we're building our review site from scratch here. TalkThisPodcastReviews.com. That doesn't actually exist. Maybe it does. I don't know. Who knows what's there? I can't vouch for what's there. And Emma, we're the editorial staff. What do you think? We gotta pick a rating system, or if we're gonna have a rating system for our reviews.
I mean, I'll say that I find rating systems useful for myself, personally, my own records. I like being able to look at something and being like, oh, I gave this a 7, and being able to remember exactly, using that as a starting point to remember why I gave it a 7. But, like you said a little bit, like, oh, if it's a 6 and under, does it even matter what it's rated? Because I'm not going to buy it, right? And that's sort of the thing with my personal ratings, too, is, like, I don't give things less than a 6 because I didn't finish them if I thought they were going to be less than a 6, you know? So at a certain point, like, it just becomes not meaningful because you're really only rating games, like, 6 to 10. Seriously.
Now, what I will say that changed how I thought about that a little bit is that if you think about grades in school, this is not the podcast to have the discussion about whether grades in school are a useful metric or not. But if you think about grades in school, it's very similar, right? Like, a 60 or below, like, you failed. So it doesn't really matter if you got a 60 in the course or you got a 25 in the course.
But what if it's a 60, but you wrote a really interesting answer to one question?
I guess that's true.
You know? Like, sure, you failed, but there's something cool in there. So if you're just scrolling down and you see the 6 and you think, nah, maybe you didn't read about how there's one cool thing that totally appeals to you and you just missed it because you saw it as a 6 and that's it. Like, that's the main problem that I think why a lot of reviewers are moving away from it, because people don't actually read the article when you provide a score. They just scroll down to see the score and the little summary, and that's it. But if you don't give them that easy thing, you get, theoretically, possibly more people reading at least a bit of the review itself.
I guess that's true. Metacritic makes up scores, though, regardless of if you give one, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's so funny.
Well, just because there's less and less big sites giving review scores. Also, Metacritic should just die.
Is that someone's job at Metacritic? Or is it like an algorithm?
It's probably a mixture, if I had to guess.
Like, imagine that your job is to read reviews and decide on a scale of 1 to 100 what number that author would have given.
I don't think they do it for all reviews. There are some on there that are unscored. Like, they'll have quotes from it, like, at the very bottom of all the reviews.
Right.
So I don't know what extent they attribute scores. But, you know.
So Metacritic, if you're not familiar with it, and I don't know how you wouldn't be, but is the review aggregator that is most prominent in the video game industry. I do think it's better than Rotten Tomatoes.
Is it, though?
Isn't it, though?
I mean, I remember learning in my business of games class that, like, some developers, like, bonus pay is dependent on whether they get above a certain score on Metacritic, which I think is stupid. Like, awful.
Sorry, to be clear, I didn't want to say the way Metacritic is used is better than Rotten Tomatoes.
Sure, I don't know the way either Rotten Tomatoes or Metacritic works, but clearly Metacritic is just as susceptible to review bombing as Rotten Tomatoes on the user score. And I don't know how the critic score really works on either of those.
So mostly what I was talking about is that Rotten Tomatoes decides if something is fresh or not based on, like, it's almost the opposite of the problem in games, in that a really mediocre movie that everyone agreed was, like, okay, could get 100% fresh rating just because theoretically, right, every review was, like, lightly positive. Whereas in games, right, like, other than the obvious review bombing situations, you don't see a game get too many, like, 3s. But at least on Metacritic, you're getting, like, a score that's just an average, as opposed to, like, it's fresh, if it's something that is, like, universally okay.
I guess so.
I feel like Rotten Tomatoes ratings have become much more prevalent in movie advertising than I remember them being, I don't know, 10 years ago or whatever. When I feel like it's such an imprecise, like, a movie that's trying to do something and had some polarized reaction that is probably a better movie than, like, I don't know. I was gonna say, like, whatever the latest Adam Sandler movie is, but, like, the latest Adam Sandler movie was actually supposed to be good, right? So,
yes. Adam Sandler's talent is directly correlated to the strength of the movie itself, I think.
Adam Sandler's
he
talent
just willingly takes on things that are awful.
Is directly correlated to how much he wanted to take a vacation to make the project.
That's true.
Directly correlated to how much is this a front for a vacation with his friends.
I just mean, like, if you put Adam Sandler in a movie with a good director that has a solid plot, he'll do good, even great, you know?
Yeah.
Just that's not his MO.
Anyway, we'll move away. But yeah,
Adam Sandler, 3 out of 5.
Adam Sandler, like 50% fresh. But no, if we were building our hypothetical review site, would you do 10 out of 10 rating scale or no?
If you did it, I think you have to define it very clearly on your site.
Sure.
Because, like, otherwise those numbers they mean such different things to different people. That if you're not saying, like, this is what a 10 is, this is what an 8 is, then people will make their own assumptions about what you mean versus actually conveying something significant about the game. But generally, I don't like them. I like reading a person's thoughts about the game more than I like them being like, the gameplay was an 8 out of 10. Like, what does that mean to me?
Okay. So that's a good transition to another a discussion we have to have about hypothetical talkthisgamereviews.net or whatever the URL was that I decided that it was earlier. So Emma, the people just want to know about the gameplay. Just tell them about the gameplay. Tell them the number of teraflops used in
I don't
the
think a game has teraflops.
Shh. Teraflops.
I think that's what are I don't know what they are, but I think it's just like a power thing on a computer, not like a game has them.
Teraflops.
Okay.
Regardless, the people just want to know about the gameplay. What are you talking about the author's thoughts?
I don't know how to follow that, really.
Are we going to allow that wishy-washy mumbo-jumbo on our site? So I feel like there's a little bit of what I would argue is a little bit of a false dichotomy, but there's a dichotomy between kind of like the two types of game reviews, right?
Sure.
I mean, the most obvious two types of game reviews are some game reviews are text, and some game reviews are videos, but I'm not talking about that right now. We'll talk about that in a moment, too. But the other dichotomy is some game reviews are about the gameplay and whether the game is fun and whether you should buy it. And some game reviews are about the game as a piece of media and the context, and oftentimes involving a little bit more overtly, anyway, the author's personal takes on the game. And I'm putting you on the spot to say which one is better.
I mean, I think a good game review has to have both of those. You should cover the extent of the game as it is presented to you. So, like, if the shooting feels good, then you say that. But also, if the shooting is incongruous with what the game is trying to say, then you say that too. I felt really good doing something that didn't feel great. You know?
Yes.
I think that's the important part of it, is that, I mean, you just, like with anything, you have to assess what's there.
I agree. I mean, that's why I think I was saying that this feels to me to be a bit of a false dichotomy. Just whenever I read, and you have made a great list here of some of your favorite game reviews, and I'm sure that if you go down to the comments of some of these, you'll get the people being like, but what was the game like? I don't want to read a personal essay. Just tell me what the gameplay was like.
I mean, one of the ones I put on there was, I think, Gita Jackson's Animal Crossing review, which is like a travel journal, basically. People hated that. I distinctly remember people despising that review, when it's like, I mean, that's that's what the game is like. You know, you do your thing on your island, and this is what she did on her island. I thought it was a good way to present about the game and the way that you would experience it. I mean, what do they want you to say? Like, you know, crafting sucks.
That's what you want them to say.
That's what I want them to say. That would be the first line of my Animal Crossing New Horizons review.
It's a good hook.
Crafting sucks.
I guess I just feel that those people are not engaging with those reviews in good faith.
Sure, yeah.
Because whenever I get to the bottom of those kinds of, like, quote-unquote thoughtful reviews, not that thought doesn't go into the other kind, but, you know, I'm using thoughtful in an almost derogatory way here, basically. Sure. There's always people being like, tell me what the gameplay is like. And it's like, if you read the review, you would notice that they did tell you what the gameplay was like. They also just spent another 2,000 words talking about other things.
Yeah.
So it rubs me the wrong way, because I do feel like it's a choice of whether you add more to that base level of the review or not. Not whether you're going to write something that's a review or you're going to write something that's not a review. Like, I get that not everybody necessarily always, like, wants to read, like, a gigantic review piece. I get that. I do. I don't always have time to read these whole big opuses on whatever the game is. But I just feel like more and more as video content for games becomes so, like, even pre-release becomes really ubiquitous, right? Mm-hmm. Writing a review that's just like here's what it looks like, here's what it plays like, not only feels like a wasted opportunity, but also feels just redundant.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why would you write a text review that does that when you could do a video review and sort of show them? Or when someone could just go to a Let's Play when it releases and check it out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of way to get information, so if you're just looking for something specific, you could just Google that question, and I guarantee it'll come up for you. You know?
Well, it's just, I do think that in games more than most other media, we see reviews really still viewed as like a consumer report kind of lens sometimes. In a way that in some ways is necessary, right? There's plenty of, like, some of the gameplay trailers you can see for games leading up to stuff can be misleading, right? Or at least it's such a tiny slice of what the game is.
Yeah.
But
I mean, that's the case for all trailers, though. They're meant to sell you something. They're not meant to show you what... I mean, they're meant to show you what it is, but in a way that'll sell it to you. You know?
Oh, absolutely.
So, of course, they're not going to be like, oh, here's the part where it glitches out if you run against the wall.
Well, yes. You got me there. But I mostly mean, nobody reads a movie review. Well, that's not... I can't say nobody, right? But fewer people read a movie review and come away with, like, but tell me if I should see it or not. You know, it feels much more accepted that it's that person's opinion and they're going to write about the movie. Whereas in games, I do feel like there's a much larger contingent that still expects this to be a, you know, like one of those, like, CNBC, like, stocks shows. It's
sure.
Like, you should buy...
I mean, part of that is probably because games are more expensive, although I would say that proportionally going to see a movie in theaters is more expensive.
Well, make it a Broadway play then. Same idea.
Sure. That's even worse, though, theoretically. Like, just on time. Let's just, like, just putting it on pure data. Like, the time you put into a standard $60 game nowadays, like, it's more expensive, but you're getting more out of it. It wasn't relevant. It was just a side
Totally.
thing.
I was trying to find something that was both more expensive per minute and more expensive in pure dollars. Continue.
Yeah. But, I mean, I just think that's where it comes from, is that these are more expensive products, and so there is more consumer regret, I guess, if you buy something and you don't like it. And then so you look at reviews to see if you should buy something, but that's not really something that reviews can necessarily provide unless you've done the research beforehand to know what reviewers you trust or what reviewers have similar taste or dissimilar taste to you.
I would love for every reviewer, I mean, this would get people totally flamed, so they would never do it, but I would love for reviewers to, like, really just have, like, an upfront page of, like, here are the kinds of games I like, here's what I'm good at, here's what I'm not good at. That would be appreciated for me, so I could do a better job finding people who play games in the way that I play games.
I mean, is there something like that for plays or movies, though? Like, that just seems like a new thing for criticism in general.
True, I would appreciate it for criticism in general, probably. But I do feel like it's a little bit more unique to games, because, like, I have the same capability, well, now I have zero capability, right? But I have the same capability to sit in a Broadway theater as, like, the Times critics do, right? Like, I can sit in a chair, probably better than they can, I'm younger than they are. But I won't necessarily have the same capability to play, for example, a third-person or first-person shooter game that I'm bad at.
Sure.
So it would be helpful for me to perhaps find someone who has a similar aversion to those types of games. So if they're going to tell me, oh, The Last of Us 2 is a masterpiece, then I would know, yes, you can play it, too.
It is the most accessible game probably ever made, so...
Yes, I greatly appreciate those options. I'm not at the point where I need, like, deaf accessibility for me.
I know. But there's stuff like, even like, you can turn on options so that when you're prone in grass, you're forever invisible, for instance.
Here's the thing. I'm too proud to take advantage of anything that will feel like an assist that way. So,
sure, okay.
I need someone who has a similar level of pride, but also a similar lack of ability. How about that? Does that make it better?
Sure, fine. I was just pointing it out.
But no, I mean, it's something that would be interesting, and I guess it's something that right now is handled by editors, obviously, right? And who gets assigned to review what game.
Yeah.
Which is not something that I had thought of at all before researching this podcast. I didn't really think at all about what was the process behind who does what. But I listened to, there was an interesting interview, I think it's part of Game Informer's podcast, but I watched it on YouTube, where they talked to their like reviews editor about video game reviews and what makes a good review, and he brutally roasted my go-to strategy when I write reviews, if the second paragraph being the lore paragraph. He was like, don't do that. Everybody does that.
Cappy's really tore us up, you know?
Yeah, it's like, do the hook and then do the lore. He was like, don't do that. I was like, yikes. But it is interesting, they talked about the balance between, you know, if you're assigning someone to a game in a series, right? Do you assign the person on your team that's a fan of the series who will have more background and, like, know what to look for and what they're, you know, what's going on in the game, right? But because they know the series, they might be more attached to the series and, like, how unbiased are you going to be there, right?
Yeah. Or
do you assign someone who's, like, theoretically newer to the series who isn't necessarily going to have the perspective of the people who, like, it's like, who are you writing for, basically? Yeah.
I mean, I do remember IGN gave, like, a 6 or something, maybe even, like, a 5 point something to one of the more recent Phoenix Wright games, and one of the things was, like, they didn't like, the spiritual mysticism elements. And it's like, nobody reading a review of, like, the 6th Phoenix Wright game has any issue with the spiritual mysticism elements. Those have been there since the first game in the series. So in some, like, sure, like, if you're writing a review of the first game, you know, say that. But if you're writing a review of the 6th game, like, who's your audience here? And, like, is saying that you have a problem with the mysticism really doing anything for anybody?
But then the question becomes, you know, are the people who are fans of the Phoenix Wright series going to buy it anyway? And so they're mostly reading the review to feel validated or feel angry, right?
I I don't know about that.
I don't mean to denigrate the Phoenix Wright fandom in general. I'm just talking, like, in general. Those people might not be using the review to guide whether or not they're going to buy the game, right?
I mean, like, sure. I just think it's like, from a personal level, I don't think Spirit of Justice is as good as some of the other Phoenix Wright games. But it's not because there is mysticism in it. It feels a little bit like if you put someone new on, like, the 6th game in a series, you lose the aspect of being able to be like, well, how does this compare against other games in the series, right?
Absolutely.
Which I think is important context, no matter what.
I agree, of course. At the same time, I recognize that if you assign me to review any of the Kingdom Hearts games, I could not do so objectively.
That's not a real thing, so that's fine.
I mean, good segue, Emma. It's a review site. Okay, we've decided that there aren't number scores, and we've decided that we'll let people write their fluffy political takes on good old American video games.
Sure.
If we want them to. Okay, cool. But don't we want them to be objective about the game? Don't we want to get an objective perspective?
It's just not a real thing. When you're talking about, like, reviewing something. Like, I'm not saying objectivism isn't a real thing in general. If someone has 3 apples, you can say that they have 3 apples, and that's an objective fact, or whatever.
We sure hope so. I've been listening to a lot of philosophy classes happening in my apartment this
Whatever.
summer.
Let's put that aside. Put the philosophy aside for a minute. But, like, everybody goes into something with their own experiences and context. They have the games they've played before and the games they haven't played before. They have the things they like and the things they don't like. They have things like their personal history or things that have just happened to them recently that seem to connect to the game they're playing. You can't just, like, shut off your entire self and write a review because you have your own opinion about what a good gun feels like, right? Or whether traversal feels good. Like, that's based on your previous experience with games and might not be somebody else's opinion. So you can't even say anything about a game without having your own personality in there. I just don't think it's possible.
And on top of that, I think games as a medium, more than pretty much any other commonly reviewed art form, right? Your experience with the game, even if I were to say, I'm going to put a robot and have it play the game. Again, the robot brings its robot history, but whatever. Let's ignore that. I've put the, like, perfect blank slate robot to have it play the game, right? Which I hope that meme account has done I aggregated 1,000 pages of game reviews, and here's the... the second paragraph would be a lore paragraph. But even if you did that, even if you had a bunch of blank slate robots playing the game, theoretically they would play the game slightly differently.
Yeah.
Right? Like, rather than if I sat all of those robots in a theater and had them watch a movie, like, presumably the movie would play mostly the same to all of them. I was going to compare myself to the New York Times critics again, but I feel like theater is the one thing where it's like, oh, well, like, maybe if we watch different shows, like, it actually would be a little different, right? But games takes that and goes to, the nth degree of your gameplay experience. Obviously, is not the same as anyone else's, even just in terms of, like, literally if I took a video of it, it would not look exactly the same.
Yeah. Plus, I would say that being a total blank slate is in itself, like, that's coloring your opinion.
I mean, yeah.
Right?
I agree. I was just, for the sake of argument.
Yeah. Just because you have no other history beyond playing this game doesn't mean what you're saying about the game is an opinion. It's just the opinion of someone who has only experienced this game.
That'd be pretty bold.
What do you mean that's pretty bold?
Like, your only experiences of playing the game.
I know.
Be an interesting reviewing perspective. I would love to read that person's review. think they would have a hard time.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about kind of like what is in the review and the structure of the review that makes a interesting to us, at least, game review, right? So what about external stuff? Like, for example, Emma, should our game site Talk This writes about games.org, it's a org now. Should we accept money from game studios to write positive reviews like everyone else is doing?
Nobody does that.
But Emma, everyone on Twitter says that they do.
It's just dumb. It's just stupid. It's just a stupid opinion that, I don't want to... It's just a Gamergate thing. Of the many things online that are Gamergate things.
Right.
This is just
the whole internet is really a Gamergate thing now, but
yeah.
Yes.
Of just like this irrational distrust of journalists, in general. There was a thread from Austin Walker a while ago where he's asking journalists if PR had ever reached out to them after they published a review.
Seemed like the universal answer was yes.
Yeah, like sometimes. At least once seemed to be the universal answer. And like sometimes, like he gave an example of when that was a good thing, right? Like they reached out to him so they could talk more about a particular aspect of the game that was interesting. But sometimes they just call because they're upset, and generally, like, that doesn't change the review. But also these companies really shouldn't be doing that, is my opinion.
Genuinely, I feel like when people get that call, they should be like, well, if you'd sent me another sweatshirt. Like, that feels like the appropriate reaction to that kind of a call.
Yeah.
Like, maybe next time you should throw in a third custom PS4.
I mean, there's a reason why it's good ethics that you have to disclose if you got anything from the company or if you know anybody who worked on the game or, anything to that effect.
Oh,
and
that was another interesting thing that they talked about in terms of who got assigned what games is so much of the time, obviously, like the same people who are writing the reviews are also writing the news pieces and that kind of thing, right? That's how jobs work.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, people will have, they'll have existing relationships with the developers from past titles or whatever, but they'll have gone and done, like, pre-release interviews or, like, about the process or something like that. Or they talked about one time, like, he was talking specifically, like, that he recused himself from writing the Final Fantasy 15 review because he had spent, like, 7 days at Square Enix and just felt like he had seen way too much of the game in advance and was way too close.
Yeah.
So that was interesting too, that kind of, because it's a tricky position, right? Theoretically, you write about games because you like games.
Yeah.
And you like the industry. So it would be cool to be able to accept that swag. But also you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so fine. That was my, like, facetious outside thing that I wanted to talk about. But you mentioned in our notes embargoes.
Yeah. So, very recently, apparently The Last of Us 2 had a very strict embargo on reviews. So sometimes embargo just means, like, this is when you can release your review, right? Like, we don't want you to release the review more than, like, a week out from the release of the game. Or sometimes they'll be like, you can't release it till the release date, which is pretty bad form, honestly. But sometimes it happens. And sometimes embargoes have more stringent policies about what you can and cannot talk about. And in the case of The Last of Us 2, they're like, well, there's an event that happens, like, a few hours in, and you can't talk about it. Or really anything that happens after it. But review it. Thanks. Which a lot of journalists so that restriction lifted on release day. right? But the reviews came out a week before release day. So a lot of people were talking about how it was kind of challenging to write a review, whether because more interesting things happened in the back half, either that they liked or that they didn't like, right? Like just things that were more talk-aboutable happened in the area that they could not talk about. And I mean, I'm sure, you know, it's good form to not, in any review, to not be like, the ending was this.
Yeah.
You know? Like, if I opened a movie review and they were like, Bruce Willis was a ghost the whole time.
No!
Sorry, that's just, you know that already, okay? Everybody
not in
knows
Die
that.
Hard.
Oh no, I spoiled Die Hard for everybody. Like, on the weekend The Sixth Sense came out, I'd be a little bit like, what? Like, what's the point of this? But at the same time, I would expect that review to be talking about the movie as a whole, you know?
It's tricky now, though, because we're not even allowed to talk about things having a twist, really, anymore, without getting accused of there being a spoiler.
Knowing that something, like, all stories have twists, theoretically. If your story doesn't have, like, some sort of twist, then what are you writing? Nothing happens. If you want to get technical, like, a punchline is like a twist, right?
Yeah.
Go down to the molecular level. The molecular level is the technical term for it.
The molecular level of the talk about ism.
But, like, you know, if you're games are so long and big to start with, and if you can't even talk about the whole experience, then are you really, can you even find a way to give a review of that game? And I read a lot of reviews of it, and I think that a lot of people did a really good job talking about it, either
of The Last of Us, right? Not of The Sixth Sense.
Yes, The Last of Us, excuse me, The Last of Us 2. I think a lot of people did a really good job talking about what they didn't like or what they did like. But embargoes make me a little bit, like, uncomfortable. In the same way that, like, Twitter posts of being like, Persona 4 Golden's out on Steam.
That's not the same way. That's a different way.
I know it's different, but it makes, or like the Marvel posts of like, don't spoil the end game. Like, yeah, don't go to somebody's post being like, I'm so excited for Marvel Endgame, and like comment the ending. But like, you know?
I guess.
It makes me a little uncomfortable.
It does feel a little gross when it comes from the company. I can't exactly put my finger on why it feels iffier when it's like Disney telling me I shouldn't do it than when it's like...
Because, it's a marketing tactic in a lot of ways.
Of course it is. But I don't know. I do feel like it's really hard to curate your social media to avoid spoilers if people aren't being at least a little bit respectful.
Sure.
Right? Because it's not even like things other people like and retweet show up on your feeds, right? Or things other people share. So I do understand it a little, but not when it's driven by the company. When it's driven by the company, it's like, ugh. That said, The Last of Us 2 is the second game ever to have a story, so to, like, not allow you to talk about the story past a few hours in feels, like, not quite right.
There's the old joke. I love that.
I had to get it in there.
I mean, I don't want to make this a spoiler discussion, but I just have never really been bothered by it. And if it is the rare product where I want to know before I get spoiled on Twitter, I'll wake up at 3 a.m. and play all of Remind before going to work.
Oh my god.
And I'm aware that not everybody can do that, but, you know.
Well, what about how long it takes to play a game? And how that affects the quality of the review?
I mean, you should say when you write the review how much of the game you played, right? You should make that clear. You shouldn't pretend that you beat the game if, like some reviews of Nier Automata, you only beat a third of the game.
Oof.
I remember reading a few reviews like that. I didn't go look for them, but I remember being like, and then, nothing really happens at the end. I was like,
I live with a walking review of that. I live with that review.
It's just funny. But yeah, you should always say, you should disclose how much of the game you played. But I mean, if the company has to make the game available in enough time for the reviewer to play it also, right? And a lot of reviewers don't get paid for playing the game.
Which is nonsense.
Yeah.
I guess I mean, though, that theoretically, I play games very slowly, right? So I probably shouldn't be the prototypical example here. But still, even if you were to amp up my, hour a day that's a couple times a week for each game to something slightly more regular, I assume that the folks reviewing games are playing them in much larger, faster chunks than I am.
Yeah.
Which is interesting in how that in itself would reflect in the experience of the game. Because theoretically they're playing it in ways that are atypical from everyone but, the crazy fans.
Sure. I think that could partially wear the complaint that, games journalists are bad at games comes from, too. Because I think if you're trying to beat, something like Cuphead in completion before your review, maybe you get a little bit more frustrated when you've been playing it for 4 hours straight.
Right. You have an actual literal deadline by which you must figure this out.
Yes. My inclination usually is that I'm pretty sure most game journalists are incredibly much better at games than I am or will ever be. Just from the fact that they must play so many for such long lengths of time.
Yeah.
I don't really, so I feel like that can sometimes come where the discrepancy comes from, because when you get frustrated, you can take a break and come back in a couple hours, and you'll figure it out. But if you have a deadline, you sometimes don't necessarily have the luxury to do that, so you just have to keep banging your head against a brick wall. Until it finally breaks, or your skull breaks, I guess. One or the other.
Yikes. Okay, another question then. I'm full of questions today. Do reviews need to tell people that the developers ruined themselves to make the game?
It's... Yes. I wish that there was more... Not that there isn't great journalism on working conditions, right? There are, from more than just Jason Schreier, too. Other people write about it.
Let's not talk about Jason Schreier on this podcast, right?
Sure.
I need a break.
I'm just saying, there's more than that. People write about development conditions on several sites, and there's many journalists that do it. But at the same time, there's not necessarily a robust, investigative journalism part of games journalism. Or there's a lot, if you're a games journalist, you write everything, right?
Yeah.
You do reviews and news and investigative pieces and think pieces and reflections. You do everything. And sometimes that's great. But sometimes it means that your review is also investigative piece, so it would be nice if there was enough. I think it would be important to mention it in the review regardless. I really love that Red Dead Redemption Kotaku review, Red Dead Redemption 2.
Mm-hmm.
Just because there's such a odd dichotomy between the message of the game and the environment in which it was produced, right? It becomes important in a way to think about the context there. But when I read movie reviews, I'm not nobody ever mentions the VFX artists must have died, even though they probably did.
I guess that's true. My feeling is, like, again, I was thinking of, because theater is what I do, right? I was thinking, like, if somehow somebody put up a Broadway show that, like, was full of a bunch of scabs and, like, they somehow got around the Broadway League and they had all these non-union performers getting paid way less than they were supposed to be getting paid and in bad working conditions and whatever, and it was directed by a sexual harasser and, like, all, and, like, throw any kind of hot button thing that would make you not want to see the show, right, at it. Like, I would want a review to tell me that. And it would
That's true.
It would feel disingenuous. Not disingenuous, but it would feel disappointing to have a review that just looked at that production on an artistic level, right?
Sure. And I was kind of focusing on labor conditions, but you're right. I do think movie reviews do usually address when, like, someone in the cast has recently been accused of sexual assault or something like that.
Right. So, I don't know. It's like, I feel you can probably get around it with Naughty Dog, right? There's been enough people being like, they just love to work all the time. It's just a workaholic culture, that, like, maybe you could get around it, right? But yeah. I just feel like when Cyberpunk comes out, where they've come out and said, like, yeah, it sucks. And it's going to keep sucking. But theoretically, that game is going to be great, right? You know, theoretically, it's going to be a crown jewel of the PS4, Xbox One, whatever generation. But at what cost?
I am afraid of when that game comes out. For my poor timeline. My poor abused timeline. People are going to be so mad.
I know.
But I don't know, like, stuff like Mortal Kombat or The Last of Us, where, you know, it's not just crunch, it's that you are giving, well, I don't really know how it is at Naughty Dog, but I imagine it's not great, but you're giving your developers, like, PTSD by what they watch in order to make such, you know, visceral violence, I guess. Like, that feels like it's important. Like, if The Last of Us 2 is trying to say something about how bad violence is, like, isn't there an inherent irony in its developers needing to look so deeply into violence to make it in the first place, you know?
Emma, art is all about suffering. I hate to break it to you.
If
the artist doesn't suffer, then the art isn't good.
No! That's not true. No!
I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Well, last but not least, one more question. Why do people get so angry about reviews? Or rather, perhaps I'm not plugged into it as much, but I don't see as much anger around movie reviews or book reviews.
I mean, it's, you know, the idea of the gamer being a victim, right? And there's some truth in that, right? Like, video games are used as scapegoats, have been used as scapegoats for things, just in the same way that, you know, like, comic books used to be, too. Of, like, they're the flashy new thing that kids like, and so they must be bad, and bad for the children. And so, you know, that's like a learned thing of when someone is dismissive of your hobby, you get defensive about it, right? Like, and that's something that I think you have to unlearn when you love something, right? Like, do I get, you know, just to use Kingdom Hearts, for example. Like, I understand people getting defensive about bad reviews because there's a lot of what I would think of as bad faith criticism out there. But it's always important to remember that not every criticism is bad faith criticism, right? Like, And you have to be willing to not just shoo everything away because it's something you love and you don't want to hear the bad stuff about it. But, you know, you shoo away the people who are clearly just trying to make people angry, sure. But then you listen to the other people and you think about it, and then you choose to keep loving something, right? Or appreciating something, or enjoying something, or whatever. But I think that, like, I'm not perfect at it, I know. Sometimes I, like, mute people just because I don't want to deal with it on my timeline for that period of time. So, you know, it's just a knee-jerk reaction of anyone who doesn't like what you like must be, you know, have some agenda or must be a bad person or whatever. And you just have to teach yourself that that's not true. It just means that they're seeing something that you're not, or they have a different opinion than you, and that's fine.
Well, what feels a little bit more unique to me about games is that, like, I think that kind of reaction of feeling like, when someone doesn't like the thing that you like is more aggressive in games, but is certainly you can find in other media.
Sure.
I think that the fact that there is a similar level of aggression towards someone liking something that you do not like in
That's
games
true.
Is a little bit more unique. Certainly to the degree that you see it. Like, I'm sure it's there in movies, right? Like, if we all look back at the reviews for Avatar, right, we can all be like, like, you were dumb, like, that movie wasn't that good, right? But I feel like there's a much more of a vitriol towards, like, 10, you know, a game that gets a 10 out of 10, and, like, that doesn't deserve a 10 out of 10, like, kind of snarling anger, than you see in other media.
I mean, like, you know, I'm sure academics get into this as well in their own academic way, but I always associate that sort of thing with just nerd culture in general.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that you would stereotypically call nerdy has those types of people for whatever reason. I don't know. I have no real clean-cut explanation for that phenomenon other than sometimes people like to feel superior to other people, I guess. But I don't really know where that comes from, as opposed to the other one, which I feel like is easier to explain.
I have wondered if some of it for games comes from the fact that there's no equivalent, like, Oscars, Emmys, Grammys, Golden Globes. Like, I realize nobody really cares that much about those too much anymore, but the fact that there's not some kind of quote-unquote objective, right, heavy quotes, body saying, like, this was the best movie, this was the best performance, right, makes the reviews feel like they have a lot more, again, heavy quote-unquote objective weight. And there's nothing to point to that's like, no, like, this is what is right.
I guess so.
I say that, of course, there is something for that exists for games. And it is the Wikipedia Best Games of All Time list.
How could we forget? Truly, to decide whether you like or dislike something, you really just need to refer to the Wikipedia Games of All Time list. And then just that argument's over. Is it on there? Is it not on there? That's your answer, if the game is good or not. That's it. You got it.
Done.
I mean, at the same time, there's a whole bunch of smaller game awards, right? Like, stuff like the BAFTAs have game categories.
That's British, though.
But it's not just British games.
I was just kidding.
You know, there's the Game Awards, which is more of a marketing opportunity than really anything else. But then again, kind of so is the Oscars, so...
Oh, definitely. Look, I'm not here to actually say that the Oscars genuinely picked the best movie of the year or anything like that. But it does give you something to center discussions about that around, right? You can kind of center it around Oscar nominations and who was in and who was snubbed and that kind of thing in a way that games don't have in the same way.
That's true. And I guess you don't really get that with books just because there are so many books.
I just feel like the book
in the
community
world.
isn't.
I know there's like lots of movies and games too, but like at the same time it feels like there are less.
I wouldn't refer to anyone as a capital R reader. You know?
You would refer to someone as a watcher?
I mean,
a viewer? I guess a viewer is a thing, isn't it?
A viewer is a thing, but I don't know that I would do that either, but you get the idea.
No, I think with any, like, community that has faced, like, mostly unjustified or overblown sort of backlash from a general community tends to form, like, a defensive little pod in itself that can later create, like, a bad environment inside that community. And I think that games definitely has that to a certain extent.
Well, we promised we would rate game reviews.
I give it a game review out of a game review.
So that's 100 out of that's 100%.
A game review is 100% game review.
No, like a 5 out of 5 is the max, right? So you gave it a game review out of game review. So that's the equivalent of a 10 out of 10. Is that really the stance you want to take?
You can't just condense that into a number, though. We're not using the transitive property here. We're just saying it's a game review out of a game review.
Here's
That's
the
not
thing, Emma. There
numbers.
are 10 letters in game review. So you just gave it 10 letters out of 10 letters.
But there's 11 characters.
We don't do characters in our review, Emma. It's all about gameplay. All about mechanics.
Fine, then you score it.
I give it a must read.
Okay.
Not every review.
Cop
You
out.
don't have to read every review, but you should be reading some.
Cop out. What a shill.
I give it a sponsored post. I give it a Naughty Dog paid me to make this podcast, to pick this topic, so that I could say that The Last of Us 2 is the second game ever to have a story. They wrote that line. They said I had to say it 3 times, so The Last of Us 2 is the second game to have a story.
Oh boy.
I can say that now, because the embargo is gone. Before the game released, I was not allowed to say that it had a story.
Yeah, you had to keep that under the hood, because it wasn't obvious. It wasn't clear that it had a story.
Now, does it have gameplay? You'll have to buy it to see. See, wasn't that a good pitch? Oh, that was a good pitch.
That was a great pitch. Good marketing.
Thanks. Well, folks, do you have an all-time favorite game review that you've read? Emma made a list in our notes, one of which I'm not allowed to read, apparently, so...
It's about the Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's not technically a review, but it sort of is. Also, you're not allowed to read it. I mean, you can. You can if you want to. I'm not going to prohibit you from seeing spoilers. You can do whatever you want. Just saying.
Well, on that note...
Anybody can spoil as much as they want. Spoil me on everything. I dare you.
Capital L listeners, do you have a favorite game review that you've ever read? Do you have a strong feeling about how objective reviewers can be and how much of their personal business you want in their reviews? Do you feel like games deserve to be reviewed at all? Should we abolish the game review?
Will someone tell me the real ending of Die Hard? Because I don't think I've ever seen it.
Is Bruce Willis a ghost in Die Hard? If you want to let us know, you should hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Talk This Podcast, and we're on YouTube at Talk This Sisters. Probably best not to hit us up on YouTube to let us know your opinions on Bruce Willis.
I think our channel name is actually Talk This Podcast now.
Oh.
I might have had to change it when I changed the email address associated with it.
Well, I'll find out, I guess. But also, so hey, maybe we're Talk This Podcast on YouTube. That would be weird. I would have to change how I talk about the outro, which is
I could probably change it back if
just
you
not
wanted to.
possible for me. It is Talk This Podcast now.
Yeah, I must have, I realized, because I've been editing a video, and I looked at it, and I was like, oh, I didn't remember changing it to that. But I had to change it from the Talk This email to my personal email.
When did your Nier video get so many views?
I know. It's rather sudden. I haven't been looking at it because I'm scared.
Well, folks, speaking of that social media, so when you follow us, you'll get to, see our thoughts on whatever we're up to, occasional memes. One day I'm going to post all my, Animal Crossing drawings of people, but I'm also embarrassed and don't want to do it. I have, 50 of them now, and I'm like, I can't post. This is embarrassing. But on the YouTube, you can check out Emma's series Play This, and soon, maybe, probably 2022, but soon,
Stop it.
a new series from Emma coming to the YouTubes.
Look forward to it.
Do you think
great.
Gen Z is roasting me for saying the YouTubes? Probably,
Yeah.
right? Oof.
I heard you say it, and I just was going to let it go.
I deserve that. I'll take that L. Anyway, you should also check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read more about the show, check out the games that are in the hat for our main episodes, read more about me and Emma. We don't say the YouTubes on there, I promise, I hope. And also check out the blog, where you can see the long-running series, Clickbait Boyfriend, where we finally got some new content coming down the pipe.
Nice.
I have to do the last one, but now I know that there's more coming, right? So that's good. Clickbait Boyfriend.
If you continue to torture him, yeah.
Literally, we watched the trailer and he was like, I'm gonna have to play this, aren't I? So he's in it for the long haul. Anyway, it's where my boyfriend's playing the Kingdom Hearts series. And also Split Screen, where Emma and I are watching Coffee Prince and My Hero Academia. I do a BuzzFeed quiz open on my phone about which K-drama I should watch based on, my dessert choices or something. So
Perfect.
Just roast me, Gen Z. Just totally rake me over the coals. Give me a 3 out of 10. Finally,
Next week. Oh, is there something else?
well, people should listen to the show, shouldn't they?
Oh, right. Yeah, they should.
Sorry,
Maybe.
this is taking me way longer than it usually does because I'm
It's okay. I
getting
keep interrupting you.
so many sidebars. But if you like the show, you should listen every week, and the best way to do that is by subscribing. So we're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, Overcast, Pocket Casts. If it ends in casts and it's not about, fishing or doctors or, members of a play or any of those other alternate forms of cast, we're there. And you should subscribe and maybe leave a rating and review. Well, hey, that's funny. Yeah, leave a rating and review of this particular episode.
We only accept 5-star ratings, though.
Yeah, be aware
Otherwise,
that anything less than 5 is a failing grade.
yeah. Otherwise, please keep it to yourself.
Send us a message on the website.
Yeah.
What's next week, Emma?
Next week, we're talking about Deadly Premonition and Dreams.
Those are 2 kind of funny titles together, aren't they?
They sure are.
Well, that'll be a fun one. Dreams, I can tell you right now, is not going to play nice as a mashup.
Nope.
Not at all. So,
Oh, maybe it will, Actually, this might work pretty well. You'll have to look into Deadly Premonition and tell me what you think. But, might work.
well, next week you'll have to tune in to find out, listeners. There will be discussion. Will there be a successful mashup? You'll have to buy the free podcast to find out. We have that embargoed until next week. Well, that's been our episode.
Yeah.
Emma, would you like to send the people off with a passing grade?
I hope this week for you is at least a 7 out of 10.
Otherwise, what's the point?